Bows, TKOs, yeah. Bows, TKOs, we got bows, TKOs, yeah. Bows, TKOs, we got bows, TKOs, yeah. Bows, TKOs.
Bows and TKOs. We are live, episode 92, coming at you this beautiful Thursday evening from the Valley. We're getting some cooler weather here in Phoenix still. I'm loving it. But I'm your host, Shane Gillette, for this weekly MMA podcast, streaming anywhere you get your podcasts and videos on YouTube. And yeah, ready to hit the mountain this weekend here in Flagstaff, go shred some snow. They're going to have about 2 feet of snow over the course of 3 days. So try to get the last of the spring skiing in. This past weekend, was able to go on an on-site for my company in Chicago. Got to be in Chicago for like 5 days, explore the city. Got to go to my first opening day for the Angels. Saw the Angels lose 8-1 to the White Sox. That was a gut punch, but great stadium. Got to visit 5 clients out there, different areas. Really good food, amazing food. Everyone talks about how good the food is. Every kind of dish I had was top notch. Was able to go to a Bulls game. Got to go to a place called Queenie's, which is like a steakhouse in the suite level of the stadium. Absolutely phenomenal. If you live in Chicago or you ever go to United Center, get a reservation for Queenie's. You will not be disappointed. Was able to catch a Blackhawks game, so got the full experience. Not this weekend, but next I go back. I have an on-site in Champaign, which is where the University of Illinois is, a couple hours away. But then head into Chicago for the weekend for a personal trip to go see Miami MLS play Chicago MLS in Soldier Field, which they don't normally play in the Bears Stadium. So a sweet game with Lionel Messi in town. He better play. So I got my one chance to see Messi play in Bears Stadium. So getting all the Chicago funsies out of the way, the touristy stuff. I went up to the Willis Tower, hung out on the ledge, saw my good friend Clark Perloom Toombs out there in Chi-Town, showed me the city. So one hell of a weekend. But enough about me. Let's talk MMA. And we have some things going around the world of MMA, not just on the UFC focus now that we have PFL actually going this evening. But some fights that have been announced. We have Jeff Neal out of his fight against Carlos Prates, and we have Ian Machado Gary taking that fight on short notice, April 26th. One hell of a scrap that'll be. So really see how good Carlos is, with probably a tougher opponent. We get to see Chris Gutierrez and John Castaneda booked again for April 26th, as well as Damon Blackshear with a quick turnaround taking on Alan Tengeli. On May 17th, we have Nursultan Ruzaboev and Dustin Stoltzfus. May 31st, we have Ketlin Vieira and Macy Chiasson, and Erin Blanchfield and Macy Barber. Some huge fights in the women's side of things. An absolute banger for UFC 315. We have Benoit Saint-Denis and Joel Alvarez. Pure violence. I cannot wait. It's funny doing the Matchmaker Monday, which I've been doing for a long time. If you don't follow me, at Bows and TKOs, Twitter, Instagram, I have a Facebook page. After every weekend's event, I match 4 fights, who I think the people should fight. And a lot of the matches I've been booking early have come to fruition, including the BSD Joel Alvarez fight, as well as this one, Bruno Silva and Joshua Van at UFC 316, which is booked for June 7th. Also on 316, another Dana White live Instagram announcement. We have Juliana Pena and Kayla Harrison, as well as Sean O'Malley and Merab Dvalishvili rematch for the Bantamweight Championship. So 2 titles on the line. That is in Newark, New Jersey. And then for June 14th, we have Edmund Shabazian taking on Andre Petroski. That is another great fight. And with this past weekend's event in Mexico, the UFC announced Noche UFC happening in Guadalajara, Mexico, September 13th. So back to Mexico for Noche UFC. And then Molly McCann, Antonina Shevchenko, and Abdul Razak Al Hassan off the UFC roster. Originally, Abdul was supposed to take on Nursultan Ruzaboev. I think that maybe him pulling out of that fight, they just released him from the roster. Molly McCann, after her loss, and Antonina hasn't fought for a while. Supposedly, she was battling cancer her last days in the UFC. But we do have some GFL news. They are finally building their cards. The first card happening in Los Angeles on May 2nd. It's a Saturday-Sunday event. A 2-day event at Shrine Auditorium right downtown by USC. On Saturday, the big fight, Uriah Faber, Renan Barao, and their rematch. You get to see Chad Mendez take on Mikey Linares. Don't even know who that is. Anthony Pettis taking on Benson Henderson again. Holly Holm taking on Julia Budd. Marlon Marias taking on Ray Borg. Alexa Connors taking on Kat Zingano. And then on Sunday, we have Tony Ferguson taking on Dylan Dennis. Uriah Hall taking on Douglas Lima. Alexander Gustafsson taking on Ovent St. Preux. Alan Belcher taking on Stuart Austin. Paige Van Zant fighting someone I don't know, Randy Field. Louis Glisselman taking on Abu Nurmagomedov. And I wasn't really sure how this played out with the teams, but they did make a post. There's 4 teams going at it. So really interested to see how this GFL product goes. I saw that there's been a couple injuries already. With some of these older fighters, I do expect to see some fighters fall out before these fights happen. So I'm interested to see how that kind of takes shape with the weigh-ins and some of the older fighters. Hopefully they could put out a good product. Out of the first card, I would have to say it would be interesting to see Uriah Faber and Renan Barao back at it. I do think Anthony Pettis still fights at a high level. Benson's always training at the MMA lab and coaching. What can Dylan Dennis do with the shell of Tony Ferguson? But honestly, the best quality fight is probably Uriah Hall and Douglas Lima. So coming around the corner here in May, a month away. And then the PFL's back in action today. We have the welterweights and featherweights. Not a lot of excitement, in my opinion, but it is Orlando. Prelims at 4:30 p.m. Pacific on ESPN+. The main card's on ESPN2 at 7 p.m. The big fight, Jason Jackson taking on Andrei Kreshkov. Jesus Pinedo taking on Adam Borix. Jeremy Kennedy taking on Movlid Kubayalev. And then the only fight on the prelims worthwhile would be the Gabriel Braga and Nathan Kelly against no-namers. But the big story was Magomed Umalatov not making weight, so he is out of the tournament, and a short notice opponent taking on Logan Storley. So let's see if the PFL could put on a decent product. Again, pretty underwhelmed with what they got going on, especially with the ability to have the best in Bellator compete against the best in PFL. They have not done that. So, yeah, let's see if they can stay afloat. Because it's a $500,000 purse now, no more. $1 million, no more. But enough of that. Let's talk UFC Fight Night Mexico. I went 7-5 in my picks. Decent night. Overall, I'm at 557 wins, 281 losses, 8 no contests and draws. On the year, 73, 40-1. Started the year a lot hotter, getting closer to roughly 7-5 each weekend. But to recap the card, I was most excited about Joe Pyfer and Kelvin Gastelum. Joe got ill the day of the fight, so he had to pull out. Super bummed about that. I hope that gets rebooked quickly. But besides that, this was a better overall product than what we saw in London at the O2. I thought the fan base was better. They were in the seats earlier. They were more rowdy. And obviously the Mexican fighters put on a show going 7-2 on the evening. There were some close fights, a lot of violence throughout the evening, even in the prelims. I didn't think the main card had a dull moment. There was some very beautiful knockouts and everything you'd want to see in Mexico City. So, some good fights we did not break down. Jamal Emmers with a vicious round 1 knockout over Gabriel Miranda. We had Lupi Godinez with a beautiful display in her unanimous decision over Julia Pilastri. We had Atiba Gautier with a round 1 knockout over Jose Medina. That earned him 50 G's, performance of the night to Gautier. We had David Martinez, who is a doctor, a couple doctors in the UFC now, with a round 1 knockout over Simon Oliveira. Performance of the night, 50 G's for David. And then Rafa Garcia with a unanimous decision over Vince Pichel. But let's kick this off in the prelims. We had Markel Medeiros with a split decision victory over Austin Hubbard. And I did not agree with this decision. I had Hubbard winning rounds 2 and 3. But honestly, I'm not terribly mad at the decision because Austin really wrestled and controlled those rounds. But he didn't do a lot with the top control and didn't land much damage. But still, when you grapple a guy and just, control 4 minutes and 30 seconds of the round, I don't know how the other guy wins. Regardless, Austin did control majority of the fight, but Medeiros came out hot, landing some good strikes, putting some damage early. Statistically, Markel landed 57 total strikes, 44 of them significant. He was 0 for 1 in takedown attempts, had a reversal in 1 minute and 33 seconds of control time. And Austin landed 62 total, so about 7 more, 26 significant. He had 2 takedowns and 9 attempts, so good defense by Markel. He had a submission attempt and 7 minutes and 34 seconds of control time. So now, Markel's streaking. His winning streak's up to 8. He's 3-0 in the UFC. And Austin extends his losing streak to 2. He's 1-3 in his UFC return since 2023. So what's next? I think Markel and Rong Zhu would be a fun fight. And for Austin, he could take on Jordan Levitt. Moving on, this man back at it again. Melquizil Costa with a unanimous decision over Christian Rodriguez. This was another fight I got wrong. Both of these fights I got wrong. And this was pretty interesting of a game plan by Christian, who has really been beating up on young up-and-coming prospects who are thought very highly of. And he did seem to have some solid success while the fight was standing, but he continued to resort to grappling. And although he was able to get Costa down, he would be very aggressive and go for submission over position, ended up getting reversed a few times, and it cost him the first 2 rounds. In round 3, Christian was more offensive. He was able to steal the round, but obviously being down 2 rounds, it was too little too late. I did think he should have tried to stand up and maybe kickbox more, but that's not what he did. So Melky, showing that he has the cardio and the output for 15 minutes, he took advantage of all of Christian's mistakes. And the way I see him winning the fight is really he just let Rodriguez beat himself, being too aggressive, took control of the positions when they came to him. Nonetheless, beautiful win by Costa, who has 2 quality wins back-to-back in pretty much 30 days. Statistically, Christian landed 77 total strikes, 64 of them significant. He went 6 for 15 in takedown attempts, so Christian was defending pretty well. He had a submission attempt, a reversal, and 6 minutes and 48 seconds of control time. While Costa landed 159 total, so he had a lot more on the output, but only 65 of them significant. A lot of it was him just on the ground, tit-tat, no damage really landed. And then he had 1 takedown and 2 attempts, a submission attempt, 3 reversals, and 4 minutes and 53 seconds of control time. So Melquizil now extends that winning streak to 3. He's 4-2 since 2023. And Christian starts a new losing streak. He moves to 4-2 since 2023. Both men have been very active. So where does Melquizil go next? We need to see Alex Caceres back in the octagon. I talked to him during the Diamondbacks season last year. I saw him in the parking lot on the way to the game. He was really cool, chatted with me and my girlfriend on the way to the stadium. And he was like, man, I'm trying to get a fight. That was a long time ago. Get him back. Let's do Melquizil and Alex Caceres. That would be a solid matchup. And for Christian, how about Hakeem Dawodu? Moving on into the main card. We had Kevin Borjas with the unanimous decision over Ronaldo Rodriguez. And what a showcase here by Kevin. Another fight I got wrong. He was able to put a stop to Ronaldo's offensive aggression. He did well defending his takedown attempts and uses his length to pick apart Ronaldo. And when he tried to close distance, he made him eat shots on the way in. Now, Ronaldo had his moments. He did get a takedown, but he wasn't able to do anything with it. And Borja showcased that Ronaldo is still a young fighter, has much more improvement to do on his feet, and that's why he was victorious. Statistically, Ronaldo landed 64 total and significant strikes. He went 1 for 5 in takedown attempts, so not very successful. Had 57 seconds of control time. And Kevin landed 84 total and 83 significant, so about 20 more with the knockdown. So Kevin starts a new winning streak. He's 2-2 in the UFC since 2023. And Ronaldo puts an end to his 7-fight winning streak. He starts a new losing streak. He's now 2-1 in the UFC. So what's next? Well, how about Kevin and Clayton Carpenter? And for Ronaldo, he could square off with the newcomer Ray Suarria. Moving on, the young Mexican prospect Raul Rosas Jr. with unanimous decision over Vince Morales. And this fight was pretty simple. It was all about the wrestling offense that Raul was going to bring. He continued to get takedowns, and Vince resorted to doing some wild submissions. He's known for his Peruvian necktie. He tried that a few times. And he did get Raul in some deep submission attempts, but nothing deep enough with enough time on the clock to get a submission. There wasn't much striking while standing from either man in this fight, but Raul controlled Vince for almost the entire fight. So another victory for the young stud. Statistically, Raul only landed 26 total strikes, 20 significant. He had 4 takedowns and 8 attempts. So if he wanted it, he was getting it. And he had 9 minutes and 38 seconds of control time, almost 2 complete rounds. Vince landed 39 total strikes, 17 significant. He had a takedown, 2 submission attempts, and 2 minutes and 14 seconds of control time. So Raul now back on a winning streak up to 4. He's 4-1 in the UFC since 2023. And Vince extends his losing streak to 3. He hasn't won in his second stint with the UFC. The alarm bells are going off for him if he wants to stay on the UFC roster. So what's next? I think Raul and Moin Gafurov would be a solid next fight for the young stud. We don't need to rush him up the ranks. And for Vince, if he's still with the UFC, he could take on Carlos Vera. What an awesome moment here. Edgar Chairez with a round 1 submission via rear naked choke over CJ Vergara. Performance of the night, 50 G's for Edgar. I knew this fight was a coin flip, but Edgar took full advantage. So it's another fight I got wrong. But Edgar is kind of a long and whippy, hard-hitting flyweight. Carlos witnessed that early. He got rocked by a wicked left hook from Edgar. And Edgar was just patient after rocking him, continuing to land with precision some big shots. And to my surprise, CJ was able to still hang in there. But Edgar continued to pounce on him when he was rocked and then just went for the neck and choked him out to get the finish. It only took Edgar 8 total and significant strikes with the submission. CJ landed 6 total and significant strikes. So Edgar starts a new winning streak. He moves to 2-1 in the UFC. And CJ extends his losing streak to 3. He's 2-3 since 2023. He's been very active. So I would love to see Edgar in a fight with Alessandro Costa. And for CJ, if he's still with the UFC, how about Felipe Bunes? Then moving on into the co-main, we had Manuel Torres with a round 1 TKO over Drew Dober. Performance of the night, 50 G's for Manuel. And, basically Drew, like he said, walked into an extended 1-2 of Manuel. He's a long power striker, and it put Drew on his ass, and Manuel pounced on him to get the finish before he could get up and gather a breath. I mean, he was landing some nasty hammer fists quickly. Drew had no chance. So Manuel landed 23 total and significant strikes with the knockdown. Drew landed 3 total and significant strikes. Big win for Manuel. He starts a new winning streak. He's 3-1 since 2023. And Drew extends his losing streak to 3. He's now only 1-4 since 2023. So what's next? Well, for Drew, I think a fight with Jared Gordon would make sense. And for Manuel, I have it listed as Thiago Santos. There's no way. There's no Thiago Santos in lightweight. Must be auto spell. Let's pull it up real quick. Who can we get from Manuel Torres after a beautiful display like that? He's going to be cruising up the ladder board. Well, I think it was, Tiago Moises. I had that on Matchmaker Monday. Let me confirm. Tiago Moises and Manuel Torres seems like the fight to make. Yes, that's what it is. And as I pull up my phone, another fight has been announced. Some breaking news. Let me confirm. And this was a fight that I was thinking of being a shoe-in based on what had happened in this last fight that we're about to talk about. So let me talk about the next fight, and then we will bring up this next fight that's been booked because it's exactly as I expected. Let's see when the date is. Interesting. Okay. So Manuel Torres, Tiago Moises, and Drew Dober and Jared Gordon. But this card was built around Brandon Moreno with the unanimous decision over Steve Erceg. And man, Brandon Moreno is just so tough. You got to love him. He does everything right. He's so fun and exciting. His boxing's just on point. The way he kind of shells up and lives behind his shoulders, it's almost impossible to hit a precision strike on him. And he was landing massive big hooks early and often. And it seemed like he was trying to get a finish on Steve, but Steve was able to eat the shots and keep going. Neither man resorted to wrestling in this fight, which is a little surprising to me. But round 3, Steve started getting some confidence in himself and just firing more of his straight shots off in volume. But he wasn't throwing it all of his power behind his strikes. It was straight jab, front kick. They were landing clean, but it's like, man, if you would have put a little bit more zip behind there, I'm interested to see how the fight would have played out. But it took him till round 3 to get that going. I think you could maybe score 1 round for Steve Erceg. But I thought Brandon was leading the dance, moving forward, controlling the octagon the entire fight. And clearly Brandon was more dominant in the first 2 rounds. Again, as the fight wore on in championship rounds, I'm surprised he didn't try to get more takedowns or even be a little bit more aggressive. He's been there in championship rounds many a times before. Steve was just kind of trying to hang in there for a while. He had no answers for Brandon's striking because when he threw, it was on point and it hit. And it was basically Moreno stalking down Steve with those big hooks and power combos through the entire fight. Steve just had that straight jab and front kick working, but he didn't throw enough of them and follow up with strikes. Cool, that straight jab lands clean. Let's do something else. Let's lead into a takedown. Let's follow it up with a combo. Front kick lands, good time to change levels. He didn't do any of that, though. And Steve has kind of been thrown into the gauntlet in the UFC in his young career. He's now fought Brandon Moreno, Kai Kara France, and Alexandre Pantoja. So hopefully we could get this guy a normal fight in the division. He's clearly skilled. No need to ruin his confidence. But statistically, Brandon landed 95 total and 89 significant strikes. He had 1 takedown and 5 attempts. Where 5 attempts came from memory, I do not remember 5 attempts. They must have just been trip attempts or lackluster just to keep Steve guessing. And he had 1 minute and 25 seconds of control time. Steve landed 119 total and 116 significant strikes. Again, the stats can be misleading. You're like, well, Steve landed more. How did he win all the rounds? But Brandon was landing with damage, and I don't feel like most of those strikes landed. They were very close because it was just a straight jab and front kick that were close, kind of hitting Brandon's hands. Regardless, Brandon extends his winning streak to 2. He's 3-2 since 2023 and stays at number 2 in the rankings. And Steve extends his losing streak to 3. He's now 3-3 in the UFC, and he moves down 1 spot in the rankings to number 9. So how do we fix the top of the flyweight division? Well, I think that Brandon and Tagir Ulanbekov have to be the next fight for Brandon. Because Kai Kara France is going to get the next title shot. And if I were to be the matchmaker, I would say Brandon Moreno, Tagir Ulanbekov. It's a new opponent. I know he's further down in the rankings. Brandon will be game, maybe in Guadalajara. And then the fight to make is Brandon Royval, Manel Kopp. And bam, what do we know? Marcel, who is my go-to source, Marcel Dorf, booked literally 28 minutes ago, Brandon Royval, Manal Cop, UFC 317. So what do you know? It's like I know what I'm talking about here. But how about Steve and Alex Perez? That seems like an appropriate next step for him. So we got Brandon Moreno, Tagirol, and Bekov. Brandon Royval, Manal Cop's already booked. I would assume that's for sure Kai Kara France getting the title fight, which I think will be on that 317 card in Vegas as well. And then we got Steve and Alex Perez. But man, Mexico put on a show, violence all around. The Mexican blood ran strong that evening. But this weekend, we're back to the Apex. UFC Fight Night Vegas 105. The prelims are at 3 p.m. Pacific on ESPN. And the main card, 7 p.m. Pacific on ESPN, so local television. To preview this card, I'm not going to beat around the bush. Some of these Apex cards lately, this is a very light Apex card. I would say there's 3 good fights, but the main event is definitely stealing the show because it is a banger. I'm previewing this card a 3 out of 10, especially because today it's announced Kennedy and Shekaku is out of his fight against Martin Boudet. So they are bringing in the LFA light heavyweight champ to fight Martin. Some good fights we will not break down. You have Vanessa Demopoulos taking on Contender Series alum Talita Alankar. We have Contender Series alum Daniel Frunza taking on Reese McKee. Diana Belbita taking on Contender Series alum Diane Barbosa. We have Davey Grant and Daniel Santos, as well as Contender Series alum Cortavius Romeus and Road to the UFC alum Chang Ho Lee. But let's kick this off in the prelims. We got one prelim fight to break down. We got Odie, the Jamaican sensation Osborne, 33 years old with a 12-8-1 record, taking on Luis Grim Garuli, 31 years old with an undefeated 10-0 record. Now, although this is Luis's UFC debut, he's getting thrown right into the fire facing Odie, who's experienced and somewhat desperate in the middle of his prime at 33. But he's trying to keep a spot in the UFC roster. He's had a tough go of late. Luis really impressed versus a stud collegiate wrestler in his Contender Series fight. But this will be a fun striking battle. Breaking it down, Odie is a southpaw fighter. He has a purple belt in BJJ and kickboxing. He's a Contender Series alum. He's on a 3-fight losing streak and is 1-3 since 2023. 5 of his 12 wins are via knockout, 4 via submission, so 9 of his 12 wins via finish, and 4 of his 8 losses are also via submission. Now, Lewis is an LFA, Fury FC, and Contender Series alum. He's undefeated on a 10-fight winning streak. 5 of his 10 wins are via knockout. Now, I would say Odie, again, tough run. He is a solid all-around fighter and striker. I think he'll have the speed advantage here, but Lewis is very powerful and has great defense. I think he's full of confidence right now, being undefeated coming to the UFC, coming off that Contender Series win. I think he's going to be too much here. For that reason, I'm taking Luis Garul. I am putting him on my parlay. We're marking that ish down, and we getting that bread. Wasn't sure if I'd put it on the parlay, but I'm thinking so. Then moving on to the main card, we have Robert Robzilla Valentin, 30 years old with an 11-4-1 record, taking on Torres the Punisher Finney, 26 years old with an undefeated 10-0 record. Now, man, all the work it has taken for Torres to get to the UFC, then they book him against a savage in Robert, who has knockout power, has struggled against grapplers, which Torres mostly relies on, but a tough debut booking. Now, he looked to have better cardio in his 3rd Contender Series fight. Dana made him go through 3 Contender Series fights, and it looked like he could go 15 minutes because he had gassed in the last one. But I do think that if Robert can land a big strike, when Torres shoots some big uppercuts, some big knees, he could look to tire him out, and that's going to be his best path to victory. Breaking this down, Robert is an Ultimate Fighter alum. He got 2nd place. He's on a 1-fight losing streak and is 5-1 since 2023. 6 of his 11 wins are via submission. 2 of his 4 losses are via knockout. And he does have a 3-inch leg reach advantage. Torres is such a short, stocky guy. Like, I'm pretty stocky. He's like this. I mean, his traps and neck, it's insane. But Torres is an Icon FC and Dana White Contenders 3-time alum, the hard way to the UFC. And 7 of his 10 wins are via knockout. Now, personally, I just feel like Robert is too skilled. I liked what I saw from him from The Ultimate Fighter. He was helping coach. He's got a high IQ. Torres probably could smother Robert right out the gates, just try to keep top control. But I'm not betting on that happening. I'm taking the underdog. The dog's coming to eat. I'm taking Robert Valentin, but I'm avoiding this on any parlays where possible. Very much a clash of styles showdown. Here a little bit different. We get a couple vets going at it. We got Gerald GM3 Mearshart, 37 years old with a 37-18 record, taking on Brad Tavares, 37 years old with a 20-11 record. Now, this is a fun veteran showdown that could go everywhere. It's going to be evenly matched, and this fight could even get fight of the night. Gerald has looked very tough, and definitely, although the wins haven't always been there, he seems to be improving. Or he's just catching fighters off guard for being underestimated, I'm not sure. But breaking it down, Gerald has a black belt in Rofu Sport Kickboxing and BJJ. He's a King of the Cage, Titan FC, an RFA alum and former champion. He has the most submission wins in UFC middleweight history at 11. These guys got some records on the division, that's for sure. He has the most finishes in UFC middleweight division history at 12. He has the highest finish rate in UFC history, 12 finishes, 12 wins, 100% finish, a minimum of 10 wins. He's on a 1-fight losing streak and is 2-3 since 2023. 29 of his 37 wins are via submission. And even more ironic, 9 of his 18 losses are also via submission. And he does have a 3.5-inch reach advantage. Now, Brad trains out of Extreme Couture. He's an Ultimate Fighter alum. He has the most bouts in UFC middleweight division history at 25. He has the most fight time in UFC middleweight division history at 5 hours, 22 minutes, and 35 seconds. He has the most decision wins in UFC middleweight division history at 13. The most decision bouts in UFC middleweight division history at 18. And he has the most unanimous decision wins in UFC middleweight division history at 10. He's tied with Christoph Jotko for the most split decision wins in UFC middleweight division history with 3. And he has the most significant strikes landed in UFC middleweight division history, 1,106. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. He's 1-3 since 2023. 5 of his 10 losses are via knockout. And he does have a 3-inch leg reach advantage. Now again, I like what I've seen from Gerald of late. He's been active with 3 fights last year in 2024. Brad has fought stiffer competition of late, but he hasn't had a quality win in years. I expect Gerald to use his length to pick at Brad, and Brad's going to look to close distance and get takedowns. I'm sure he will have takedowns, but I'm not sure if he's going to be able to keep GM3 down. And GM3 is a obviously massive submission threat, so I think he'll be active enough to win the decision. For that reason, I'm taking another underdog. The dogs are coming to eat. Ho, ho. But I am not putting this on any parlays. This is an awesome coin flip fight. Then moving on in the co-main, we have Joe Anderson to Barao Brito, 30 years old with a 17-4-1 record, taking on Pat Sabatini, 34 years old with a 19-5 record. Now this should be a quality fight. We get 2 men in their primes at 30 and 34 that are looking to boost their stocks and have a crack at the top of the division. Pat has had a solid run against lesser competition, and Joe Anderson's had quality wins. He's already beat the likes of Chepe Mariscal, Diego Lopez, Andre Fili, Jonathan Pierce, and Jack Shore, 2 of which, JSP and Jack Shore, are no longer in the UFC. But Pat Sabatini is a submission stud, This is very much a clash of style showdown. Now, breaking it down, Joe Anderson trains out of Shoot Box Yao Emilio. He's an LFA and Contender Series alum. He's on a 1-fight losing streak and is 3-1 since 2023. 7 of his 17 wins are via knockout, 8 via submission, so 15 of his 17 wins via finish. Now, Pat has a black belt in BJJ and Tang Soo Do. He has a D1 wrestling background at a Rider University. He's a Ring of Combat and Cage Fury alum and former champ with 3 successful Cage Fury title defenses. He's on a 1-fight winning streak and is 2-1 since 2023. 12 of his 19 wins are via submission, and 3 of his 5 losses are via knockout. Now, Joe Anderson lost a very, very close decision against William Gomez 6 months ago. And in that fight, Gomez was able to use his length to his advantage. Here, Pat doesn't have that advantage, and I think Brito is actually a better MMA wrestler as well. Pat is going to have a lot of things go right because I think Brito is a harder hitter. He's more offensive, more confident in his game. For that reason, I'm taking Joe Anderson Brito. We are putting him on that parlay. We marking that ish down, and we getting that bread. Speaking of getting that bread, in Chicago, I always do same game parlays on the games I went to. Had no luck, but I made a mixed sports parlay, some college basketball, NBA, NHL, and MMA, 4 MMA fights. I had a $700 cash out option before the Brandon Moreno fight. I rode strong, baby, and the baby face assassin didn't let me down. $25 to win $11.40 on my trip. Free personal weekend. You'll love to see it. But let's talk about the main event in the Apex this weekend. We have Josh, Mr. Clean Emmett. That's not his real nickname. That's got to be his nickname, though. He's like CO2 or something like that. Mr. Clean. He is Mr. Clean. 40 years old with a 19-4 record and the number 8 next to his name. Just a big, shredded, bald white guy. Taking on Lerone the Miracle Murphy. 33 years old with a 15-0-1 record and the number 10 next to his name. Now, Josh is getting a stud in his prime for his 40th birthday present. He just celebrated it a month ago. Lerone has turned into a very well-rounded machine and doesn't have a lot of weaknesses. He has fought to a lot of decisions, but he's showcased the ability to go 25 minutes in the Edson Barboza main event, which was an absolute scrap. Breaking this down, Josh trains out of Team Alpha Male. He has a purple belt in BJJ. He has an NAIA wrestling background out of Menlo College. 5 of his last 7 fights have been fight of the night or performance of the night. Mr. Clean's been cleaning up. He shows up. He shows out. He has the most knockdowns in UFC featherweight division history at 12. He's tied with Chuck Liddell, Quentin Jackson, Cody Garbrandt, and Montel Jackson for most consecutive fights with a knockdown landed in UFC history at 7. What a group of names to be aligned with. He had the 2023 knockout of the year against Bryce Mitchell. It was devastating. He's a King of the Cage alum. He's on a 1-fight winning streak and is 1-2 since 2023. And 7 of his 19 wins are via knockout. Now, Lerone trains out of Manchester Top Team. He has a purple belt in BJJ. He is undefeated on a 15-fight winning streak. He did have a draw in there in his UFC debut, but he's 7-0-1 in the UFC. 7 of his 15 wins are via knockout, and he does have a 3.5-inch reach advantage. Now, I would assume after that violent knockout, Josh is probably full of confidence. That was a short notice fight over a year ago. Why it's taken him so long to get back to the octagon, I'm not too sure, especially because of his age. Maybe nobody wants to fight him. But Murphy is going to have to avoid the big shots. Over the course of 5 rounds, though, I expect him to land more volume, be the fresher fighter. He is much younger, and have the ability to even wrestle Josh as well. For that reason, I'm saying, and still undefeated, I'm taking Lerone Murphy, but I'm avoiding this on any parlays. Josh Emmett could hit like a fucking Mack truck. On the UFC interview this week, he said, bet the house on him as an underdog. So again, he's full of confidence. Pretty light card, though. I would say the Josh and Lerone fight, the Joe Anderson and Pat fight, the Gerald Brad fight, and the Torres Robert fight definitely must see. So the main card's really where it's at. But next week, another pay-per-view, UFC 314 back in Miami for an absolutely stacked pay-per-view headlined by Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopez. I'm very much looking forward to this. But that's episode 92. We had PFL, GFL making some moves. We got some shit going. I'm your host, Shane Gillette. See you next week.